Hello everybody, my name is Marsh, and today we're going to be doing a review on Final Fantasy XVI. Let's jump into it. For this review, this is going to be a spoiler-free review, so you don't need to worry about any spoilers. The footage I'm going to be showing is going to be very early game, so there's not going to be anything that you won't see very early on in the game if you decide to play it. With all that being said, if you do end up enjoying this review, consider leaving a like and subscribing. That would be greatly appreciated, but let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk about some of my pros, some of my cons, and we'll just go from there. Pro number one, we're going to start out with a pro because we want to be optimistic. And the biggest pro is actually the story and plot itself. What I mean by this is the actual main storyline. The main storyline is good. It's not the best Final Fantasy. It's not anything so innovative it's going to like change your mind, but it's adequate. It does its job. I think the beginning of the story is really enthralling. There's a few choices I don't agree with that were made later on in the story, but overall I really enjoyed where it went. I liked the villains, I liked the heroes, I liked the morally gray aspect they brought to the story. This Final Fantasy is very grown up compared to the other ones, so there's a lot more questionable things that happen, and it makes you think about, was this the right choice? Or should this have happened? Should this person have been killed? Should they have left them alive, etc., etc.? And it makes you think more than the surface level, and it gives a lot of background to the characters themselves. So overall for the story, it was good. Not the best Final Fantasy, definitely not the worst. It did its job, and it was there. Now, let's go ahead and jump into a con. Going off of the main storyline, my first con is that of the side quests. Almost all of the side quests are useless in this game. They're boring fetch quests, go to this area, kill this monster type of quests. They're very MMO like, and I could definitely see Yoshi P's influence. I believe he's the director of the game. He did Final Fantasy XIV, and this is honestly my biggest complaint with the game as well. It feels like the parts that excel are the main storyline, but everything else you can tell is taken from an MMO instead of being taken from like previous Final Fantasies or current game structure with how side quests are handled. All the side quests are basically useless outside of the ones that you do before the very final boss. And I did every single side quest in the game, so I'm qualified to speak on this, I would say. But the ones you do before the very final boss actually have like cutscenes attached to them, and there's characters, and it gives like development, and you helps grow the bond between like the characters and everything. But literally every other side quest is completely useless. They're basically fetch quests from MMOs. It literally felt like playing a Realm Reborn again in Final Fantasy XIV. It's not enjoyable for a single player game. I would honestly recommend that you just either do them and skip all the cutscenes until the very last chapter. You'll know when you get there, or don't do them at all because it's just a waste of time. There's no reason to do them outside of maybe if you want material, but that's not really even needed, to be honest, because the game's not that difficult. Along with that as well, if we look at how previous games have handled side quests, it's always something that is never deterring from the main storyline. In this game, you see all the markers pop up, and they're like distractions. It makes you feel like you have to fulfill these side quests before you move on. Versus previous Final Fantasy games, there's not even quest markers for the most part. And if you run into a side quest, you discover about it, you do it. You talk to this person, and they're like, hey, maybe if you talk to this person, there's something cool that can happen. You don't ever need to pay attention to it. Or you can go talk to that person and be like, whoa, there's something cool here I can do. And there's no constant quest markers popping up, getting in your way. And it's very MMO and Final Fantasy XIV feeling. And that's not what I want in my single player games. That's my honestly biggest complaint. All the side content is basically useless in this game. Even like when you go to things like upgrading weapons. My other complaint with that is the upgraded weapons, you don't feel the upgrades. Yes, you are stronger and you are killing enemies, but because of the enemy scaling with you, it just feels like a constant sponge when you're fighting. And so now that we're talking about as well, let's just go over the gameplay. The pro about the gameplay is that the gameplay is adequate. It does its job, it's fun, but at a certain point, you kind of learn certain combos and things to do, and it just turns into you repeating those combos constantly and fighting these hordes of enemies that are basically useless, and you don't need to do anything with it. And then when you look at things like the boss fights, a lot of them come down to you whittling down the bosses, and some of them can be difficult at times, but they're never really challenging enough to make you lose per se. I maybe died like twice in the game, and that's because I didn't come in with any like potions before a fight because I was being dumb. But they're nothing like Dark Souls or anything like that. I will say though, with the boss fights, the scale, magnitude, and epicness of them is crazy. Like, it's unrivaled, specifically with the third boss in the game, I want to say. Yeah, I'm going to say it's the third. The boss fight was like over an hour long. There's multiple stages. There was a certain part where the music kicked in and you're just like going and going, and it's just like super hype, and you're like, yes, 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 let's go, go, go. And those feelings of like hype and magnitude are honestly unmatched. The problem is it's not every fight that's like that. It, up to a certain point, it is. And then I feel like the actual final boss battle was kind of lacking. Even the second to last boss battle, especially compared to like the first like 3 or 4 boss battles. The first 3 or 4 are pretty intense and super hyped, and the music is feeding into it. You're feeling it. And then the last like 2 boss battles are like, come on, that is that all? Is that really it? Come on. That's how I felt about it. You may feel different. Feel free to let me know in the comments below, but be careful for spoilers. Use like code names or something, I don't know. But yeah. Back to the gameplay though, it's very simplistic and there's not much to it. You can upgrade your powers that you get, and they'll be like slightly stronger, but you won't really get like new crazy combos and things like that. And there's nothing rewarding about upgrading them because they're just basic, and you could kind of learn like certain combos with certain powers that basically have you destroy every enemy if you use the combos in certain ways. And that's basically what I figured out early on, and I didn't really need to switch it up. So there's not much to that. With the gameplay though, there are a few extra things you can do. There's like a hunt board where you can kill extra enemies. My main issue with the hunt board is a lot of them are just reskins of previous enemies you fight. And even some of the like harder ones or the S tier ones, they're not really unique characters. They're just reskins. It'd been nice if they made actual like unique monsters for them that aren't like just different colors and different moves and slightly different movesets. That was like a little bit of a disappointment. Give us actual like bosses that we can't find anywhere. It's not like Final Fantasy VII where you run into like the big dude in the sea. Like, a lot of old Final Fantasy games have bosses that are totally different from every other enemy when you run into them. And it was lacking that with the hunt board. There was no bosses that were unique. And then outside of that, you can upgrade your weapons, do things. Like I mentioned before, my issue with upgrading the weapons is everything felt useless in terms of gear and weapons. You can see your weapon change, it's there in the cutscenes for you, but it doesn't feel like you're making an impact because everything is so bullet spongy that it takes so many hits to kill anything that you don't really feel like your upgrades are useful. And so it's just like, oh, what's the cooler sword I have now, basically. Now, I don't want to be super negative Nancy, so I'll say one more positive before I go into a few more complaints, and that's in regards to the characters. If you're willing to invest and do side quests and do that, then some of the character relationships can be very rewarding. The main romance, I was all for. The relationship between certain characters, I was for as well. Certain ones I was really attached to. Other ones I did not give 2 craps about. It's not the strongest, and I think one of the reasons why it's not the strongest actually comes at the detriment of it being focused primarily on our main character, Clive. In this game, we can only play as Clive, and so because of that, we only get the experience from Clive's point of view. In previous Final Fantasy games, you had like the main character you would play and the main protagonist, but you would have a party. You could play as your party, you can use them, and part of that was because it's turn-based, so you can use the other characters. Since there's no more turn-based, you don't really get to use the other characters. You don't really see them in combat using their special abilities. You do slightly, but it's not like prominent. It's not going to stop the screen and show them doing like their strongest attack or anything like that. So you never really get a connection to them. They're just kind of following you, and they give you 1 or 2 pieces of dialogue in each area that you go to, and then they just like shut up for the rest of it. And so it'd been nice if we could switch characters and do it that way. And I think that's my biggest gripe with the action-based combat is, 1, it's so bullet spongy. It doesn't feel concrete, and it's not difficult enough. And 2, at least with the turn-based combat, there's more strategy involved. It makes things more difficult, and it lets you get to know the characters and use them and switch them out and do what you want with them. And it was really missing that. The whole thing about Final Fantasy, a lot of them have this theme of being part of a team, part of a family, and doing things together. And it always culminates at the end of each Final Fantasy to be like, we have such a strong team. We love each other and we're doing this for everyone. And you still have that, but it doesn't hit quite as hard because you feel like you're alone, even though you're not. And there's certain characters that are with you that help build your bond, but you're not with everyone. And so it doesn't feel as connected with the whole group. You're only connected to like 2 or 3 characters, and the rest are just like there. And you like them slightly more than you would a basic NPC, but they're not important to you, if that makes sense. And I know I'm sounding super critical. I did enjoy the game. I think it's definitely a step up from like Final Fantasy 15. Now, in terms of the series going forward, what I would want out of that, it's tough to say. I feel like ever since Final Fantasy X, I haven't played every single Final Fantasy, by the way, but from speaking with people who have, and I've played over half of them, Final Fantasy 14, 15, 16, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 4, and like a few other spin-offs. So I have enough experience, I feel like, to speak on it. I feel like 10 was the last one to really capture that magical feeling in Final Fantasy fans. And I was speaking with some Final Fantasy fans, and they kind of feel like betrayed in a way. It's not for everyone. Just take this with a grain of salt. But like, the series they grew up with is not the same as what it was prior. And it's okay to change. There's always changes in each Final Fantasy game with the way the systems work. But what's true to the core of the series is not remaining. The team building, the aspect of that, I think part of it, at least with the last few games, is them trying to adapt and appeal to Western culture in a way. And I feel like they're trying to make it so basic and open to Western culture that it's actually hurting the fan base, and they should really focus on the fans. And that was part of the reason they brought in Yoshi P, because of the success that happened with 14. The problem with that is he's an MMO director. He's not a single player director, and so the game feels like an MMO when you're not doing the main storyline. And so it comes to a detriment of half of the game being boring as hell. And so you have the main storyline, which is good. I feel like they really need to go back to turn-based combat, or the way Final Fantasy VII Remake has it, where you can slow down time and do your moves and do your special spells. I feel like that's honestly the best way to go about it, because that's another thing in this game. There's certain people in Final Fantasy that love just using spells, and you can't do any spells in this game because you're just Clive. You get to use spells for like one moment in the like demo, and that's it. So I think going back to some type of turn-based or mixed turn-based, like in Final Fantasy VII, is actually the way to go going forward. Give us the main storyline. Don't worry about side quests as much. Let them be there as an optional thing, but don't make it feel like it's necessary to continue in the game. Make it feel like it's just additions, fun things, like little mini games, like in Final Fantasy Remake, where he's doing squats and things like that. Make it something like that, and it would improve the series. Now, I still think it's a step up from 15 in terms of the game itself, the story, and what it brings to it. But even like, also, it's also a step back in certain cases, like I mentioned with the team members. In 15, you could switch to Ignis and all the other members, Prompto, and you could play as them, and it made it impactful at the end, at least for me, since it was my first Final Fantasy game, when they're like sitting by a campfire and talking at the end, if you know the scene, and it made me emotional. I didn't really get that emotional feeling in most of the parts. There was some where I'm like, okay, teensy weensy, but it didn't hit me like other games. So this is me doing a whole bunch of rambling and complaining, and I apologize about it. I just need to get all my thoughts out, because this is a series I ultimately love. I plan to play all of them one day. I'm over halfway, and I just want it to take the right steps moving forward. And that's basically where it comes from, is a place of love. So Final Fantasy 16, my final verdict. I think it's a great storyline. You should skip all the side content because it's useless. And if you're an obsessed Final Fantasy fan, maybe pick it up. If you're not a Final Fantasy fan, I would say wait for a sale before you pick it up, unless you're like so obsessed with how it plays. And even then, play the demo. The demo is 2 hours long. It'll give you a good taste. I will say the demo is more exciting than the majority of the game. It really, like the Steam, drops off compared to the demo. It picks back up in certain moments, but it's very on and off versus the demo is just like shoo. So it could be false propaganda or advertisement if you play it. But yeah, if you're on the edge, wait for a sale or play the demo and make the decision there. If you're hyped for it and you want to play it no matter what, then go ahead and buy it. Tell me what you thought about it though. It's definitely not my game of the year. I keep saying that. I feel like Resident Evil 4 Remake is. I was really hoping it would be my game of the year. I think Starfield might be the one to do that, hopefully. But we'll see. Other than that though, everybody, thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. I do plan on making another Final Fantasy video. I'm going to do like a funny summary type of video on Final Fantasy 16. So stay tuned for that. Eventually, those take forever to make, so maybe in like a month or so. But that's all. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.